In the pages of Marvel Comics' current Amazing Spider-Man series, Peter Parker's love interest, Mary Jane, has been trapped in an alternate dimension. And Peter Parker recently escaped the dimension and is trying to do everything he can in order to save her. But it turns out Peter is actually a fugitive on the run from several factions leaning into his location. In the latest issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, will we finally learn what happened and what ultimately led the dissolution between Peter and Mary's relationship? My name is Ariko Braddock, and today let's go ahead and dive right into The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 24. But before we get deeper into the video, I want to go ahead and encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button if you enjoy our content. I want to go ahead and introduce this new issue of The Amazing Spider-Man by reading Marvel's creative team for the issue. This one is written by Zeb Wells, featuring art from John Romita Jr., inks from Scott Hanna, colors from Marcio Menyz, letters from VC's Joe Caramagna, and the cover for the issue is illustrated by John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz. And I want to go ahead and read Marvel Comics solicitation text to introduce this issue. Witness what brought Peter and Norman Osborn together. Your opinion of the hero and who the villain is may end up at least blurred. And here is a look over at the cover for The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 24. This one is illustrated over from John Romita Jr. As we mentioned earlier here, we can kind of get a look at one of the plot points of the issue where Norman Osborn is kind of helping Peter assemble a suit so that Peter is able to go ahead and head into the alternate dimension to save Mary Jane. And I want to give a big thanks over to Adventures in Poor Taste for posting this preview of the issue. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about artist John Romita Jr.'s work over in this issue. So I did find that John Romita Jr.'s line is a little bit imprecise, which does end up kind of affecting the rest of the story. But the storytelling in the issue, kind of from panel to panel, really shows that John Romita Jr. is really kind of capable of depicting motion in a very interesting way. I love this page in particular as there's a sort of kind of shadowy figure staring at Peter from a different perspective over on the page. And also I love kind of the use of silhouettes over in this page as well, with kind of the big blocky panels. But ultimately, this is a sort of mixed bag, as I think some of the details in the background from John Romita Jr. are not kind of present in the issue. And also, I don't think John Romita Jr. is able to capture all of the emotion coming from the facial expressions from certain characters. That being said, this issue features a lot of content over with the Fantastic Four, and I do think that John Romita Jr. is able to capture some really fantastic facial expressions over from Ben Grimm, the Thing, over in this tale. So overall, I think there's some kind of positives and negatives to what John Romita Jr. delivers in this issue, but the storytelling in motion is incredibly kind of coherent, and I think gets across some of the kind of subtext in Zeb Wells' script really nicely from John Romita Jr. And I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the writing in this issue over from Zeb Wells. So in kind of the opening of the issue, we touch on how Peter is kind of right now isolating himself in order to resolve his problem as quick as he possibly can. He's kind of cutting corners in the issue and infiltrating the Fantastic Four's Baxter building in order to get a part to kind of recover his suit so he can save Mary Jane as quickly as possible, which naturally leads to some animosity between him and some of the other characters over in the Marvel Universe. Again, I really like how Zeb Wells uses some of the plot threads over in this issue to kind of set up the character relationships that we've seen play out over the previous issues of Amazing Spider-Man. I want to give this issue kind of, special props for seeding Ms. Marvel's kind of background over in the pages of the main Amazing Spider-Man book as well. I thought that was a really nice touch over from Marvel. Towards the end of the issue, Peter has a really kind of climactic reunion over with Mary Jane as he's able to kind of go back into the alternate dimension. And I really like how the kind of context has changed for this sequence. It's definitely much, much darker here, considering that the relationship between Peter and Mary, it has sort of kind of dissolved. And I feel like we do have to take a step back and talk a little bit about the premise of this story versus what we actually see on the page. I really enjoyed this kind of like dimension hopping look over into the Amazing Spider-Man, featuring a mathematician working with, a god essentially. But I understand why some people are a little bit kind of hesitant, towards this story ultimately, because it's hard to point to something that Peter did exactly in this issue to sort of alienate his relationship over with Mary Jane or the rest of the cast in the issue, aside from, stealing a few things, but it was all sort of in service to a greater good. And it's hard to imagine that, some of the cast members over in Peter's life have an issue with him serving as, Peter Parker. And it's also very, very sad that in the kind of lead up to Peter doing everything he could to save Mary, that the status quo of kind of Mary and Paul was introduced over in the issue. But I really kind of enjoyed that heartbreak and that tension over in the tale. I just recognize that it's definitely going to alienate, some readers or members of the audience here. And also, I wish that there could have been some kind of, more climactic emotional stakes as we're sort of ending this, relationship that's incredibly long. And I really hope there's a little bit more characterization in future issues of Spider-Man to make this a little bit more clear for readers. Overall, though, I do think there is some good material in this story arc, and I think it's ultimately best if you just go ahead and look past some of the marketing and acknowledge what's here. I think the kind of confrontation between the emissary and kind of Paul in this issue was actually also fascinating here. And I'm a little bit interested to see how kind of, Peter, Mary, and Paul are going to escape this alternate dimension again, and how the relationship between kind of the kind of vast majority of their characters is going to play out over the coming issues. So overall, I do think that the Amazing Spider-Man number 24 has some actually pretty good moments, and it has some really great storytelling in terms of what John Romita Jr. was looking to accomplish. And I really did enjoy kind of the emotional stakes between Peter and what he was going through in the issue. Ultimately, though, it is frustrating that we can't point to one decisive thing that Peter does this late into the arc, kind of retelling what Peter did. And I wish this was just a little bit more clear, or maybe not advertised the way it was. But I still think that this issue does a great job kind of strengthening some of the relationships between Peter and his supporting cast. That's probably going to play out really interesting in future issues. I really liked the way that the Ms. Marvel storyline was seated as well here. I thought that was really, really interesting. So I want to know from you, what were some of your thoughts over on The Amazing Spider-Man 24? Did you like this issue more than I did? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for coming to check out the video, and we'll be back really soon for more excellent comic book content. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.